From Hiroshima, from the venue of the G7 summit. This is the sidelines of the summit. Prime Minister Modi in his second bilateral of the day, meeting with the Vietnamese head of state and his delegation. Earlier in the day, the Prime Minister had met Korea's Prime Minister Yeol. Now he is with the Vietnamese head of state. India and Vietnam share long historical ties, and both in defense and in other issues of strategic concern. Both have common interests. Both countries are collaborating in multiple domains such as defense cooperation, trade and geopolitical sphere. Apart from this, both countries share common values like multilateralism based on equality, respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations, and respect for international law and order. While defense cooperation has been one of the most significant pillars of the comprehensive strategic partnership initiated by the two countries, the relationship between two countries was established much earlier. India had established the Consul General's office in Hanoi as early as 1956, and the relationship between India and Vietnam has only strengthened with time. And joining me now is my senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor. Abhishek, another very significant bilateral meet on the sidelines of the G7, India and Vietnam. If you could add more perspective, what it means, the two countries with long-held ties in all spheres.
Well, yes, Vietnam is a close partner in Asia-Pacific of India. And apart from a thriving trade relationship, what is important is that increasingly, Rukma, there is security cooperation happening between the two sides. Remember, Vietnam is one of the half a dozen odd nations in Asia-Pacific which have standing disputes with China and are facing the brunt of Chinese expansionism. That brings commonality in terms of making sure that every nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity is respected, that there is no unilateral change of status quo, there is no change of boundaries and attempt to change facts on the ground. So that bit of cooperation is there. But remember, these are bilateral meetings happening on the sidelines of the G7 summit, for which Prime Minister is in Hiroshima, Japan, and he's going to have a very, very packed day. He began early at 7:30 a.m. Japan time, which was about 3 a.m. India time, where he met one-on-one with the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, who's in white. He's there in Hiroshima to participate in G7. Then he went on to unveil the bust of Mahatma Gandhi at the site, very close to the site where the nuclear bombing had happened in 1945. And then he had a bilateral with South Korea. And now, as we speak, he's having his third bilateral, and this is with the president of Vietnam, Prime Minister of Vietnam, and following which he would be heading straight for the G7 summit venue, and then participate in the working session where he is going to make three interventions about which we have been discussing on climate change, development goals, and overall peace and prosperity and progress of the world. And then again, he has a bilateral later in the evening with French President Emmanuel Macron, and then the big one at about 6 p.m. Japan time, which should be about 2:30 p.m. India time, on his meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. And then again, he goes back to the G7 session, where he's again going to make an intervention. And then it caps the day with Quad Summit at around 8 p.m. Hiroshima time. So that's how really the day pans out, with almost half a dozen bilateral meetings and participation in 2 working sessions. One was going to happen tomorrow, and then the Quad Summit. That's how really the day pans out for the Prime Minister. And in the picture as of now, we are seeing the 3rd bilateral panning out between Prime Minister Modi and the leader of Vietnam.
Right, Abhishek. A very significant meeting with the far-reaching implications. India has always realized Vietnam as a potential regional power, and the cooperation between the 2 countries has always been at the highest level. Also, Abhishek, if you could take us through, the various bilateral mechanisms, that have been initiated over the years between India and Vietnam. Vietnam's has shown surprising growth and development, both in terms of trade with other countries in the region and so on. It's also a country with immense political stability, and India would be looking forward to really furthering ties with Vietnam in that regard.
Well, we have a very friendly relationship, a bilateral relationship with Vietnam, and apart from cultural and economic links, really centuries. The recent as I was mentioning, that there is commonality interest between sides for increasing related to a strategic part sometime in 2007. Prime Minister Modi, in fact, upgraded it to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And since then, we have seen a high level of engagement happening with 2 sides. And Vietnam has enjoyed stable relations. So, sometime, and very good person about to understand.
स्वच्छ भारत मिशन ग्रामीण की अपार सफलता।
Coming back to you, but right now Prime Minister Narendra Modi there with the Prime Minister of Vietnam. This is the 2nd bilateral of the day that India is holding. Earlier in the day, the Prime Minister had met the Prime Minister of South Korea. India and Vietnam share deep ties, both in defense as well as in other strategic areas. And Vietnam